All right, let's get this started. Y'all ready? Y'all ready? I hope so. We gotta get this started. Let's say hi to that special somebody. 1, 2, 3. Hi, Mom. We gotta pick some callers. Let me know if you want this caller. 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah!
All right, blue it is. Yeah, I know, too easy. All right, well, here we go. This sermon is part 2, and I am going to be a man of my word. I'm going to make good on my promise from last week, and so you already know what this sermon is titled. It is titled, The Man to Be or The Man to Find. That way, it's not just all about the ladies, and it's not just like the ladies are getting hit with Ephesians 5, but also guess who's going to get hit with Ephesians 5 tonight? The dudes. Now. Yeah, the ladies again. No, it's going to be the guys. It's time for the guys to get blasted by the Apostle Paul. You know, my hope from last week is that you were able to see a picture of what a godly wife looks like, and not your idea, not your friend's idea, not even society's idea, but God's idea. What a godly woman looks like according to the Bible. That's reality. That's the truth. Look, who cares about my idea? Who cares about your idea? Who cares about your friend's idea? Who cares about society's idea? What God says, that is what matters. And what God said and what we saw last week is that there is this woman, and that this woman is able to love. She's able to love others. She's able to love others in such a way that people no longer see the woman, but that people actually see something different. People see the church. That was the burden from last week. That, ladies, do you love others in such a way where people want to learn more about Faith Community Church, where they're like, what is she all about? What is going on here? Get me to that church. Let me learn what she's learning. Let me learn what exactly is going on here. And it's not just that this woman's love reflects the entire church, but it's also that her love reflects who? Christ. Christ himself. And so whenever we talk about what the right kind of woman looks like, look, for a young Christian woman, there's a high standard. God cares about you, and he also cares about you becoming the right kind of woman. And the issue, it's not perfection, but the issue is progress. And so work on this. This is foundational. This is a prerequisite that you need to cultivate this kind of love in your relationships, that this needs to be set in place and set in motion before you can even think about dating. And so set yourself up for success. Set yourself up where you're living in this kind of way so that whenever the time comes for this to actually happen, that look, you can actually love the right kind of person in the right kind of way because you've been doing that all along to begin with. Set yourself up for success in dating and in marriage. And as we come to our verses today, Paul turns to the guys and he says, men, it's showtime. Because for a young Christian man, there is also likewise a high standard. And so our verses today are Ephesians 5, verses 25 to 33. So turn there now. Turn to Ephesians 5, verses 25 through 33. And while you're turning there, let me tell you a little story. Missy, my wife, she used to teach second graders at Legacy. And if you know anything about second graders, they are these incredible, tiny, funny, and weird little people. And we used to have a collection of all the funny things that these second graders used to write in class, particularly to Missy. And so one kid, he wrote Missy a love note, and it said, "Mrs. Kingsley, you are kind like the Holy Spirit." What a compliment. I mean, the compliments are all downhill for her from there. I mean, and that kid's also going places. And there was this other assignment where the kids were supposed to write what they wanted to be when they grew up. And one kid wrote, I don't want to be, and he wrote, I don't want to be dumb. And he spelled it like this. And between Missy and I, this D-U-M dumb, this is like a top tier inside joke for us. And, you know, we say this all the time. Miles will put both of his hands down his mouth, and he'll kind of ram them down his mouth, and then he'll start coughing and gagging, and then he'll look around just like, you know, what exactly is going on here? As if it wasn't just him. And he's only 5 months old, but I'll still tell him, Mr. D-U-M dumb, what are you thinking? And whenever we talk about being D-U-M dumb, there's really one person right now that I just want to talk about. And that person is actually high school, HS for high school Jared. Whenever I was in high school, I was the champion. I was the captain at being D-U-M dumb, which is not what you want to be the captain for or being the champion of. And the reason why I look back at my time in high school like this is because I just simply cared about all the wrong things. Back then for me, the end all and the be all was dating. It really was like my entire life. It just beep, 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 beep. This is an orbit. I'm just orbiting around. It's like my whole life is just centered and centered and centered, and I'm just thinking about and I'm consumed with, and it's just all about that's everything that it was for me. And I really thought that, hey, if I was just dating, then I'd be way happier. If I was just dating somebody, or if I was somebody's boyfriend, then hey, look, I'd have way more fun, I'd be cooler, I'd be more popular. And listen, I paid the price because of how D-U-M dumb I was. And when I started dating this girl, and when she became my girlfriend, I wasn't happier. And I wasn't having more fun. And being cooler or being popular, that meant nothing to me because I was miserable all the time and I knew that I was shipwrecking my life. But I was stubborn and I was arrogant and I was prideful and I was blinded by my sins such that I didn't, and I refused to break up with her even when I knew that I should have. And eventually, some of you guys know my older brother, Ben. Yeah, you got to meet him for the wedding, and he flies out every once in a while, and we love this guy, right? He's the best. And whenever I was in high school, one day he sat me down at the peak of my D-U-M dumbness, all right? He sat me down, and he put his arm around me, and he told me this story about a dog. And here is a little doggy, and you know what happened to my dog. My dog died, but this dog did not die. And here's what this dog does. This dog feels sick, and so it vomits. And here's the vomit. And so it vomits, and it smells bad, and it leaves the vomit, and then guess what it does? It goes back to the vomit, and then it eats the vomit. And then guess what it does because it just ate vomit? It vomits again, and so there's more vomit now. And then it's like, well, it leaves, but then it what? But then it comes back. And then guess what it does? It eats more of the vomit, and then it vomits again. And there's a story of this dog that's just stuck in this perpetual loop of it looks at its vomit, it vomits. It eats its vomit, and it just keeps it vomiting and vomiting and vomiting, and it's just this ridiculous. As a dog returns to his vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. That's Proverbs 26:11. And whenever my brother was telling me that story, he said, Jared, that's you. You are the dog. And you know what? He was right. So what went wrong in my life? It's this. I didn't know Ephesians 5:25-33. I didn't know these verses. These verses were not set in my heart. And for the guys here, this sermon is just this. This sermon is me wrapping my arm around you like a quasi-older brother. I might be too old to be your older brother, so like a weird older uncle who like is 5'7" or whatever. But this is my prayer, that you just learn from my mistakes. That's it. Learn from my mistakes. Learn these verses well. If you get these verses, and if you love these verses, and you treasure them, and you set them in your heart, and then if you act upon them, God will grow you into the right kind of man, the kind of man who will be a godly husband, the kind of man who will be set up for success and for faithfulness in dating. But before you can even think about dating, guys, you need to ask yourself this question. For the men, write this down. Am I becoming the right kind of man? Write that down. Am I becoming the right kind of man? And ladies, while the men are writing that down, look, ladies, there are so many losers out there. All right? It takes one to know one, and I used to be one, and so I know you can trust me on this one, and I want you to know too. And whether it's the cute guy, or whether it's the popular guy, the athletic guy, the funny guy, the artistic guy, the guy who sings, the musical guy, I don't know, whatever kind of guy it is, the TikTok guy with the TikTok hair, who knows? Listen, those guys, ladies, those guys should mean nothing to you if they're not becoming the right kind of man, per Ephesians 5, verses 25 to 33. And as God grows you into the right kind of woman, and as you get older, and as you begin to think about some of these things, my prayer is that God will grow you into the kind of woman who desires the right kind of man. And so for both the ladies, and so also for the guys, this brings us to one key question. And the key question of the entire sermon is this: what does the right kind of man look like? What does the right kind of man look like? And so let's get into this, because look, we know what the right kind of woman looks like. Paul has been very clear, and she lives out all of this theology, and within a marriage, she places that all upon her husband, and it's beautiful. But now Paul's like, no, now this needs to happen. All right? It needs to be an equal exchange. And so here is the first kind of thing that the right man must have. He must have, number one, a sacrificial love. A sacrificial love. Write that down. And this is verses 25 to 27. Verses 25 to 27. And so read these verses with me. Listen to what Paul says. He says, verse 25, he says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish." Notice, look at verse 25 again. Notice there that Paul does not say, "Husbands, love your wife just as Christ also loved the church and gave some stuff up for her." It also doesn't say that he gave up some things or that he gave up some parts of himself for her. Rather, it says what? He gave what? Himself up for her. That's totality. That's comprehensive. That is everything. This is total sacrifice. And what God has called the husband to do is to love his wife in such a way, with the kind of love that is so sacrificial that it actually reflects and it recapitulates and it looks like the cross. That it looks like Christ's sacrifice on the cross, Christ's death on the cross. And Paul's point is, look, God has loved us and he's died for us. He sanctified us. He cleansed us. He washed us and clothed us in splendor and made us right and presentable before the Father. That's striking. That's a love that defies all logic. And now Paul turns to the husband and he says, fulfill this. Love your wife sacrificially. Give her all of your strength, where you stop at nothing, even if that means that you die for your wife. Paul says that's what sacrificial love is. And after all, Christ loved you and died for you. And so now you mirror that kind of love. And for the men here, if you want to grow into this kind of a man that has this kind of love, and if you want to prepare yourself well for dating, here is a question that you need to ask yourself. Write this down. Am I a selfish person? Write that down. Am I a selfish person? When you're selfish, it's all about who, It's all about yourself. You just see yourself, and you just see your own needs and your own wants. And look, who cares about this person? Or who cares about that person? What's in it for who? Numero uno. What's in it for me? That person will destroy a dating relationship and a marriage. The husband in these verses, this guy doesn't see himself. He never sees himself. He sees his wife, and he sees the cross. And so, man, let me encourage you this way. Start seeking the good of others. Like your family. Help your dad out. Whether it's you mow the lawn, don't fight with him on that, or taking out the trash, and your mom. Look, if you're not asking your mom what you can do for her and how you can serve her, why would you ever do that for your future wife? If you don't love the first woman in your life sacrificially, then you won't love the last woman and the final woman in your life sacrificially. This is not about your convenience. This isn't about your comfort. This is about laying all of that down for someone else. And so start now. Push yourself to the side and begin placing other people, like your family, like your siblings, place them center stage. And ladies, a pro tip here. You will learn a lot about a guy when you look at how he treats his mom. If he's trashing his mom, and that's the woman that loves him the most, and then you would be the next woman who would love him the most, and even more, that's a major red flag. Okay, and so right away we know that, hey, the right kind of man, he has a sacrificial love. And now Paul adds another thing. Not only does this man have a sacrificial love, but this man, point two, he also has a singular love. He also has a singular love. And this is verses 28 through 30. This is verses 28 through 30. Read these verses with me. Look at what Paul says in verse 28. He says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For verse 29, no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because, verse 30, we are members of his body. If a sacrificial love, in point one, is looking at the extent, or if it's looking at the breadth of a Christian husband's love, then a singular love is dealing with the intensity of that love. Everyone loves, and everyone takes care of, and everyone nurtures their own body. And this is easy to prove. Let's say that this is you right here, okay? And your stomach starts grumbling because you're really hungry, and you're like, well, what do? Easy. You go get food. Let's pretend that you're at Valencia Ice Station, which I never want to go back to again because they tried to rob us. And you fall down somehow. All right, you fall down. You're like, oh no. All right, and you're like, oh, my knee, my leg. All right, that's your leg right there. It's crazy. What should you do? You go to the hospital. You're not like, it's just a scratch. Your leg's like, going the wrong way. You're like, it's just a little flesh wound. Give me a Band-Aid. No, you're going to take care of your own body. Let's pretend that you're outside and you're like, Burr, it's really cold. And you're like, okay, let me go back inside and grab my jacket. And so you go get your jacket. This is your jacket. And you wear your jacket and everything's okay. The wind's coming, but it's all right because you take care of your own body, whatever it is. This is just instinct. No one needs to tell you to eat food. If you're about to die, no one needs to tell you to go to the hospital or to put on a jacket. You just do it. You just know to do that. And you take care of yourself intentionally all the time. And that's the same kind of instinct that the husband must have for his wife, where now her needs are his needs. Her desires are his desires. Her concerns are his concerns. His passion and his goal is now to resolve these concerns and to meet all of these needs and desires. The godly husband, the Christian husband, he takes it upon himself, all of that upon himself, because he loves her more than himself. And for the men here, if you want to grow into the kind of man like this, who really knows what it means to love singularly, if you want to prepare yourself well for dating, then here is what you need to ask yourself. Ask yourself this: What is my biggest love? What is my biggest love? What is my greatest love? What's that thing that's your thing? That thing where if someone was to just take it away, if someone was able to completely remove from your life, you would be devastated. This is really embarrassing, but I'll say it anyways. Whenever I was a freshman in high school, a pastor had asked me that question, and the answer that I gave to him was World of Warcraft. It's an online video game. It's a massive, I hate talking about this. It's a massively multiplayer online video game. And in this video game, you can do /play and see how many hours you had in the game. I had dumped so many hours that as a freshman in high school, I literally thought to myself, I could have learned 2 languages. And that's not an exaggeration. I poured all my time into that game, and that was my thing. And just the thought of somebody taking that thing and all my time and all my rare swords away or whatever, I mean, that was awful to me. And it sounds ridiculous and embarrassing, but for you, what is that thing, guys? Maybe it's a sport. Maybe you could never live without baseball or basketball or football or whatever. You know, maybe it's this video game. Maybe someone's like, the thought of me losing all my V-Bucks. The thought of me losing all my Fortnite skins, all right? What is that thing in your life? And listen, guys, there are so many things that are fighting and vying for your attention. So many things are competing for your devotion. But your biggest love, your greatest love, that can only be Christ. And you need to become the kind of man that's resolved, where you daily make a conscious effort to reserve that spot for him and for him alone. Begin this now, where you love Christ singularly, instinctually, intensely, passionately. Devotion means that you have to sacrifice. And some of you will say, yeah, of course I'm devoted to Christ. Are you kidding me? I love Christ. He's my biggest love. But your life in no way, in no shape, in no form reflects any kind of sacrifice towards God. So look, let me challenge you this way. Be real with yourself. Have a sit down with yourself, and begin evaluating, where is my real love? Where is my real devotion? Because if you don't love Christ singularly first, you're not the right kind of man, period. And you definitely won't be the kind of man who can love a woman singularly. And so with that, we've seen now, hey, the right kind of a man, he has a sacrificial love. He also has a singular love. And the final thing is this, the right kind of man, he has, third and final point, is that he has a special love. A special love. And this is verses 31 to 33, and I know that alliteration is corny because you have the S and the S and the S here, so they all rhyme, or they all, alliterate, but it all worked out, so, whatever. Okay, look at verse 31 here. Listen to what Paul says. He says, therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Verse 32, this mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. So the love that a husband must have for his wife, it needs to be special, and it needs to be unique, and it needs to be special and unique because marriage itself is special and is unique. And that's why Paul is quoting from Genesis 2:24, because marriage is where God uniquely, where he takes two people and he makes them one. This is the only human relationship, period, across the board that has this kind of dynamic. There's nothing else like this, where two become one flesh together in oneness and in unity. And do you see in verse 32 where Paul says this mystery is what? What does it say? It is profound, or something like that. And people are like, what's going on there? Let me explain. A mystery, and we already know this because we've seen the word mystery before in the book of Ephesians. A mystery is something that's veiled, something that's hidden, where you can't know, you can't figure it out unless God actually pulls back the veil and reveals it. And all the way back, think all the way back now, to Ephesians 1 through 3. Paul, this guy has been detailing and outlining the grandeur of God's plan. That in eternity past, God chose. Before the foundation of the world, God chose. And he chose a people who would become his own. And this grand plan, it resulted in a mystery that was hidden. It resulted in not just Jews, but also who? Gentiles. Very good, Ms. Stockwell. It resulted in also Gentiles being united to Christ. Not just as Jewish Christians, not as Gentile Christians, but just as what? Just as Christians. Christians united in Christ. Back in Paul's day, that was crazy. In Paul's day, that was revolutionary. That was the unthinkable. We take this for granted. But an ancient Jew hearing that of like, Gentiles can become Christians, and what's a Christian? And they can be united in Christ? What's that all about? And what Paul does here is he does this. He is looking at Ephesians 1 through 3. And he's looking at God. And he's looking at all the ways in which God has loved all of his own and how he has turned sinners into saints. And he's turned a Jew or a Gentile into a Christian. And Paul is looking at how they are now united in him and united in Christ and how they've become his own and how God has showered and poured all of his love on that. And now what Paul does is he draws a line. He draws a line from, he takes all of this and he draws a line to all of this, to a marriage. And he says this, Ephesians 1 through 3, that actually teaches you something about a marriage. And a marriage per the entire biblical theology of what marriage is, that actually teaches you something now about Ephesians 1 through 3. And it's this: marriage reflects the very redemptive love of God. Marriage reflects the very redemptive love of God. A love, per Ephesians 1 through 3, that was set in eternity past. A love that was put into motion and effectual to save sinners and unite them to his Son. A love that's so powerful that no one or nothing could ever break it. A love that wraps together every single thing that God has done for the church. And Paul now says your future marriage should put on display all of Ephesians 1, all of Ephesians 2, and all of Ephesians 3. That's the kind of love that a husband must have for his wife. It's a love that is supreme. It's the highest form of human love possible. And in that, this love is most certainly a special love. Men, if you want to grow into the right kind of man who will one day love a woman like this, then you need to fundamentally correct. You need to fundamentally change the way in which you think about marriage. When the world talks about marriage, it's almost viewed sometimes as just being stupid. Like, getting the government involved in my relationship and my personal life and then risking half of everything that I own, that's a hard sell. And if that's the case, then why would you ever get married if you view marriage as that? And then being with somebody for your whole life, or if you just view marriage as something that you need to do so that you can do X, Y, or Z, if that's you, then you do not get it. You're not viewing marriage the way that God views marriage. And so this is the time now for you to lay down the right kind of foundation. Invest your time in seeing marriage the way that God sees marriage. If you do that, and when you do that, that will yield so much fruit in your life later down the road. Marriage, put it this way, marriage is the triumph of God's love. Marriage is God's masterpiece where you live out your deepest convictions, where you put theology, where you put Ephesians 1 and Ephesians 2 and Ephesians 3, you now put that into practice, where you love your spouse with a love that's sacrificial and singular and special, so much so that an unbeliever should be able to see the kind of love one day that you have for your spouse, and they should have about a billion questions for you. Why do you love them in this way and that way and that way? And then all of your answers go back to Christ's love for you. I love her in this way because God and Christ and his Son and his eternal and grand plan has chosen me and has loved me in all of these ways. And guys, for you, let me just get really practical here. What this means for a lot of you is that you just put your hopes and your dreams of dating on pause for a season. Do you guys know that scene in the movies where the plane is nosediving and everyone's screaming, and then the airbags or the little oxygen masks fall down? It's a classic scene. It's in all of these movies. It's like some of you are in that nosedive right now, and you're like, the plane is crashing and you're about to die, and then the oxygen masks fall down, and then you nudge the girl next to you and you're like, hey, what's your number? That's probably not the right idea right now. That's the wrong move. What you need to do is put the oxygen mask on yourself. Don't kill yourself, all right? Give yourself a chance to actually live and to actually survive. Just do first things first. That's what I'm trying to tell you now. Use this season to grow into the right kind of man, the kind of man who loves well. And ladies, when the time comes, and let me close with this, whenever that time may be, this is the kind of man to find as God grows you into the right kind of woman. And when dating kind of begins to appear on the horizon, look for the kind of man that treats his family well, who prioritizes God above everything and everyone else, and who has investing and is investing his time in understanding marriage according to God. That's the kind of man who would be worthy one day of your attention, and who would be worthy one day of your affection. And so this, men, is the man to be. And ladies, this is one day the man to find. Is this who you will look for? And men, is this the kind of man that you're growing into? That's it.